Jesus was a storyteller. God's written revelation to the world is a book full of stories. Why did our Creator choose to communicate this way? There's something powerful about stories to capture minds and hearts. God is known by the stories we tell of Him. And as God continues to work today, there are still stories to tell. John Piper describes missions as the second greatest human activity in the world. And if this is true, then the story of missions must be the second greatest story we can tell. Stories of redemption, trials, triumphs, deep need, impossible vision, simple faith, and God's amazing provision. These stories have power to inform, inspire, encourage. This is the unexpected power of a simple image, a carefully crafted film, or the written word. And in the 21st century, where the work of global missions turns a page, where the stuff that's left to do is the hardest stuff, in a world of fast-paced, digital, dynamic, crowded communication, these are the stories the global church needs to hear. As the world gets smaller and shrinks to the size of bits and bytes, are we growing closer together, closer to the goal of every tribe and nation and people, or are we simply holding ground? Does the church remember the African people who have never heard a word of Scripture, or the missionary on the front lines in desperate need of prayer? Does the church remember their charge to go and make disciples? This is the power of story, to teach, challenge, and mobilize with more than 900 unreached African people groups who still have no viable witness to the gospel. Who will go to them? How will their need rise above the noise of a 21st century media blitz? And who will preach to them? How will they be called unless they are first captivated, convicted, compelled? And this is the power of story, wielded for the glory of God, offered for the hope of the nations. We've come and gone back to Africa and back to America over the years, making visits here, and each time we've had a chance to come back here and share with this community what God's been doing. The on-field media team that you just saw that video about is the ministry that we're involved with right now. Some of you might remember that I was a mission pilot. We did that for about 12 years in Africa, and in more recent years I switched to leading a team of media missionaries that use tools like this to help mobilize the church. So we're a team of storytellers, photographers, videographers, writers, and things like that. That's the work we're doing. Our family, my wife and 2 kids and I, we live in Kenya. Our home is in Nairobi, the capital city. It's a bustling city of something like 4 million people. And from there, my ministry takes me out all over the continent of Africa to remote places and different places where AIM is at work, our mission, different places where the church is at work in Africa, and we go there to get some of those stories so that we can share those with the global church. So that's what we're doing, and we are doing this as part of Africa Inland Mission. My small little media team is just a small piece of the big, broad work of AIM. Africa Inland Mission vision is to establish Christ-centered churches among all African peoples. And there are many ministries that work towards that end. And the goal is to see the church grow in Africa. We firmly believe that the local church is the hope of the world. The church in Africa is the hope for Africa. And strong churches are where that hope's going to come from. So we are very privileged to be a part of that. We love what we do out there. We love being a part of all of that. And it has its ups and downs and trials at times. And we really do appreciate the folks at home who are behind us in prayer, above all in prayer, behind your missionaries. So we thank you for that. I'm just going to give you a brief little overview of the unreached peoples of Africa. I spoke at length about that last night, but we'll do a little quick one this morning. AIM's vision to get Christ-centered churches among all the African people groups is really focused on the unreached people groups of Africa. And well, first of all, we think of the world in a missional sense through the filter of people groups, not necessarily nations. So to say that there's a church in Tanzania isn't really an indicator if Tanzanians have been reached with the gospel, because Tanzania is more than a country. Tanzania has probably 40 different distinct ethnic people groups. And just because there's a church among one of those people groups, it doesn't mean that the gospel can ever cross over to a neighboring people group, because there's barriers. There's barriers to the gospel. Those barriers can be a language, a different language, or a different culture that won't allow the gospel to be communicated well. That barrier could be political barriers, where it's illegal for a missionary to come into a particular country. That barrier could be geographical. There's a people group in Sudan that's just so far up a mountain beyond the reach of any road or even a footpath that people hardly even know they exist. So there are many barriers to the gospel taking root among all the different people groups of Africa, and one of AIM's jobs as a mission is to try to overcome those barriers in different ways. So when we look at Africa in terms of people groups, there are over 2,000 distinct ethnic separate people groups on the continent of Africa, a continent of 1.2 billion people. And among those over 2,000 people groups, over 900 of them are still considered unreached. They have no viable access to the gospel, no way to hear the gospel. And among those 900 plus unreached people groups, over 700 of those are Muslim people groups, some of the hardest to reach people in the world. When we talk about missions today, that little clip said something about missions, the work of global missions turning a page. And that page turning is a fresh look at what's left to do in the task of the Great Commission, and what mission agencies and missionaries are finding as they look at what's left to do is that what's left to do is some of the hardest work, the hardest places to go and the hardest people to reach. And many of those peoples and places are among the Muslim peoples of the world. Most of North Africa is very, very Muslim. And these are some of the hardest places that our mission is trying to engage with the gospel. Jesus' mission to the world, which he expressed in Luke chapter 4, when Jesus went to teach in the synagogue, and he pulled the scroll down from the archives, and he read from Isaiah 61. And this was kind of the beginning of Jesus' mission on earth, and this was a bit of his mission statement. And he read from Isaiah 61. He read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And Jesus said, as he read that this has been fulfilled today in your presence. And there's an element of what Isaiah wrote there very, very long ago, before Jesus read those words, that was very physical blindness and physical oppression by governments and such. And when Jesus read this, it took on another aspect, another layer, and that was a spiritual as well. And when I look at Africa and I look at the task of reaching the hardest people in the hardest places, the unreached peoples of Africa, I see that Jesus' mission statement at the beginning of his ministry is very similar to the work that's left to do here at the end times that we're coming into. That the preaching of liberty to the poor in spirit, those who are captive to ideologies like Islam, those who are blinded to the truth because of traditional belief systems in Africa, and those who are oppressed by various kinds of spiritual forces. That is still the mission of the global church in engaging the unreached world. And as we move forward, our mission organization is looking more and more to partner with the church in Africa. There are a lot of difficult things still about Africa and life in Africa and the needs, but one of the really points of good news is that there is a vibrant church in Africa, a vibrant church among many different peoples. And it's our goal as a mission to work with the African church to reach the remaining unreached people groups, those 900 plus who have no viable witness to the gospel. So that is what we're about in this small little corner of ministry, where we're telling the stories of God's work to help mobilize and challenge the global church to action. And that is, the broader goal in our hearts, to see the unreached reached. And you guys supporting us, supporting other missionaries, we just want to encourage you that work is moving forward. And as it moves forward into the future, it might get harder and harder to do, and we need your prayers more and more as we do that. So we want to implore your prayers, and we want to thank you for your love and acceptance and support for our family very personally, and for you guys' heart for missions and heart for the world. So thank you.